the financial world is experiencing a catastrophic failure of its most sacred rule. And while the average person is losing their life savings, a tiny fraction of elite investors are quietly making a fortune riding the chaos. You have been told your whole life by financial advisors and retirement planners to put 60% of your money in stocks and 40% in bonds. You were promised that when stocks fall, bonds would rise and keep your money safe. That was a lie. Or at least it is a massive lie today. We are currently watching traditional assets plunge simultaneously across the board. It is like being on a sinking ship in the middle of a freezing ocean and realizing the lifeboats you paid for are made of solid lead. The trigger for this unfolding nightmare is crude oil, surging aggressively toward the $100 a barrel mark. But this is not just a number flashing on a trading screen. It is a systemic shockwave, tearing through the very foundation of the global economy. To understand exactly how we got here and how the smart money is escaping the carnage, we have to go back to the very origins of modern investing and human psychology. Human beings are hardwired to follow the herd. In the 1970s, a brilliant psychologist named Daniel Kahneman, who later won the Nobel Prize in economics, fundamentally changed how we understand human decision-making. He discovered that our brains operate using two entirely different systems. System 1 is fast automatic and deeply emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and logical. When it comes to investing, most people rely entirely on System 1. They want a simple heuristic. They want an easy rule of thumb, so they do not have to think about the complex, terrifying reality of global finance. The 60-40 portfolio was the ultimate System 1 safety blanket. It was easy to understand. It felt safe because everyone else was doing it. This herd mentality creates a massive blind spot. When the herd believes a rule is an absolute law of physics, they become completely incapable of recognizing a systemic paradigm shift. They experience severe cognitive dissonance when the market stops obeying their rules. Right now, the herd is frozen in panic as their 60-40 portfolios collapse, but they refuse to adapt. They are waiting for a rescue that is simply never going to come. To understand why the rescue is not coming, we have to look at the man who accidentally built this trap. In 1952, a young economist named Harry Markowitz published a groundbreaking paper called Portfolio Selection. Before, Markowitz investing was basically just gambling. You bought a stock because you liked the company and you hoped. The price went up. Markowitz changed the world by proving mathematically that you could drastically reduce your risk by holding a diversified mix of assets that move in opposite directions. Think of it like a teeter-totter on a playground. If you put stocks on one side and bonds on the other, they are supposed to balance each other out. If a recession hits and stocks crash, the central bank will lower interest rates. When interest rates go down, bond prices go up. So the bond side of the teeter-totter rises into the air, saving your portfolio from hitting the dirt. This beautiful, simple, elegant mathematical idea won Markowitz a Nobel Prize. It birthed the modern financial industry. For over 40 years, this teeter-totter worked like absolute magic. From the early 1980s all the way to the early 2020s, the world experienced a massive, unprecedented bull market in bonds. Every time the stock market crashed like in the dot-com bubble of 2000, or the great financial crisis of 2008, your bonds skyrocketed in value. Investors became dangerously complacent. They forgot that the teeter-totter was resting on the solid ground of low inflation and cheap energy. Today, that solid ground has completely collapsed into a sinkhole. Both sides of the teeter-totter have snapped and are plunging into the abyss together. Stocks are falling because corporate profit margins are getting squeezed, and bonds are falling because interest rates are rising. When inflation runs hot, the inverse correlation completely breaks down. This brings us to the core of the current crisis, which is the explosive price of crude oil. When you see oil nearing $100 a barrel, you might just think it means paying a few extra dollars to fill up your car. But that is a profound misunderstanding of how the world works. Oil is not just fuel. Oil is the literal blood of human civilization. It is the plastic casing on the computer or phone you are watching this on. It is the nitrogen fertilizer that grows the food you eat. It is the diesel fuel in the massive cargo ships and trucks that deliver that food to your local grocery store. It is the asphalt on the roads you drive on. When the price of oil surges, it acts like a massive, unavoidable, invisible tax on every single physical object you touch. When a company has to pay double for the fuel to manufacture and transport its goods, it has only two choices. It can absorb the cost and let its profits collapse, or it can pass that cost on to you, the consumer, by raising prices. This is known as cost-push inflation. It is like an automatic delivery fee, being suddenly attached to everything in the entire global economy. The last time the world experienced an energy shock of this magnitude was in the 1970s. In 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries launched a massive oil embargo. The price of oil quadrupled almost overnight in a matter of months. The result was a decade of profound economic misery. We saw the birth of a terrifying economic monster called stagflation. Stagflation is the ultimate nightmare scenario for any central bank. It means the economy is stagnating and economic growth is slowing down, but inflation is still raging out of control, destroying the purchasing power of the working class. Imagine you are driving a car and you slam your left foot on the brake pedal, while simultaneously slamming your right foot on the gas pedal. The engine screams and catches fire while the car violently shakes, but barely moves forward. That is what stagflation does to a country. The Federal Reserve is currently trapped in a burning room, with absolutely no exits. Their entire job is to keep prices stable and maximize employment. But when stagflation hits, those two goals become completely opposed to one another. If the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates to stimulate the economy and create jobs, they act like a firefighter spraying gasoline on a blazing fire. They will cause hyperinflation, but if they raise interest rates to kill the inflation fire, they choke the economy to death and cause a brutal recession. Historically, when central banks face this impossible choice, they are forced to fight inflation first. That is exactly what the legendary Federal Reserve Chairman, Paul Volcker, had to do in the early 1980s. Volcker saw that inflation was destroying the fabric of American society, so he made the agonizing decision to raise interest rates to nearly 20%. He successfully killed the inflation monster. But the cure was almost worse than the disease. He caused a severe recession. Millions of people lost their jobs and the misery index exploded. Today, central banks are staring down the exact same ghost. They are being forced into a highly aggressive, hawkish stance because of that persistent $100 oil. They have to keep financial conditions incredibly tight, even as the broader economy begins to crack under the pressure. This is precisely why your traditional stock portfolio is being violently slaughtered. Growth stocks are taking the heaviest casualties. Technology companies, in particular, are incredibly sensitive to rising interest rates. To understand why, we have to translate Wall Street jargon into plain English. A technology stock is essentially a promise of massive cash flows, 10 or 20 years in the future. When interest rates are at zero, those future promises look amazing because money is practically free to borrow. You are happy to bet on a company that might conquer the world in 2040. But when interest rates are high, and you can get a guaranteed 5% return right now, just for holding short-term government paper, those risky future promises suddenly look terrible. Why would you buy a promise of a beautiful mansion in 10 years, when you can hold a solid gold brick in your hand right now? It is the classic proverb of a bird in the hand versus 10 in the bush. As interest rates rise, the mathematical present value of those future tech profits collapses violently. That is why the technology sector is experiencing severe bearish momentum today. The financial sector is also bleeding out. You might assume that banks love high interest rates because they can charge everyday people more money for loans and mortgages. But when an oil shock hits the system and the economy slows down, people stop borrowing money to buy houses and start new businesses. Even worse, the businesses and individuals who already have loans start defaulting because they can no longer afford the higher payments. The banks have to absorb those massive catastrophic losses. Their balance sheets come under immense pressure and credit markets tighten up like a steel trap. So if growth stocks are dead and bonds are dead, and financial stocks are dead, where is all the smart institutional money going? They are not just burying their cash in the backyard. The elite institutional investors are moving massive amounts of capital into a completely different universe that the average retail investor barely understands. They are moving into managed futures. To understand why managed futures are the ultimate escape hatch, we have to step back in time and look at the fascinating history of human commerce. Long before Wall Street ever existed, there was the Dojima Rice Exchange in 18th century Japan. In the 1730s, wealthy samurai and merchants gathered in the city of Osaka to trade contracts for rice that had not even been harvested yet. The farmers wanted to lock in a guaranteed price. to protect themselves from bad weather or terrible harvests, and the merchants wanted to guarantee their supply. This was the brilliant birth of the futures contract. A man named Munehisa Homa became the most famous trader in this market, effectively inventing the candlestick charts that day traders still use today. Fast forward to the city of Chicago in 1848. American farmers were bringing their massive wheat harvests to the city, all at the exact same time, causing the price to completely crash. Then, in the dead of winter, there was absolutely no wheat available, and the prices skyrocketed, causing starvation. So the merchants created the Chicago Board of Trade to buy and sell futures contracts to stabilize the agricultural economy. A futures contract is simply a legally binding agreement to buy or sell a specific asset at a specific price on a specific date in the future. Today, it allows you to trade almost anything in the physical or financial world. You can trade crude oil, gold, wheat, coffee, foreign currencies, and even interest rates themselves. But here is the absolute secret that you need to understand. The elite hedge funds and institutions using managed futures today do not care about the underlying physical commodity. They do not care if it is a barrel of sweet crude oil or a bushel of yellow corn. They only care about one single thing, the mathematical trend. This philosophy is known as trend following. Trend following was made famous in the 1980s by a legendary eccentric trader named Richard Dennis. Dennis believed that trading was a highly teachable mechanical skill, not some magical innate talent. He made a massive bet with his partner William Eckhart and recruited a group of complete novices from all walks of life. He called them the turtle traders. He taught them a strictly disciplined rules-based mathematical system. The rule for the turtles was astonishingly simple, but incredibly hard for a human to execute. If a market breaks out of its historical range and starts trending upward, you buy it immediately. If a market breaks down and starts trending downward, you short sell it immediately. You do not try to predict the future. You do not watch the financial news networks. You do not listen to highly paid economists making bold predictions. You completely eliminate your human emotions, your fear and your greed, and you just blindly follow the mathematical trend. Think of a trend follower like a professional surfer standing on a beach. A surfer does not try to predict the deep ocean currents or calculate the gravitational pull of the moon. They just wait patiently for a wave to form on the horizon. When the wave finally swells, they paddle in and ride it for as long as it possibly lasts. When the wave eventually breaks and loses its momentum, they simply get off the board and wait for the next one. Trend followers are mathematical surfers. Right now, the wave in crude oil is massive, and it is moving aggressively upward. So the trend followers are relentlessly buying oil futures. The wave in global bond markets is moving violently downward, so the trend followers are heavily shorting bonds, making an absolute fortune. As everyone else watches their retirement accounts burn, managed futures actively thrive on market chaos. When the world is completely dislocated, when geopolitical wars break out, when global supply chains suddenly collapse, when inflation spirals wildly out of control, those massive macro events create incredibly persistent trends, and managed futures are explicitly designed to capture those massive trends. They do not rely on the stock market going up to make money. They have absolutely zero correlation to your traditional stock and bond portfolios. This is exactly why managed futures are exploding in popularity among institutional investors right now. The smart money deeply realizes that the old regime of cheap money and non-existent inflation is gone forever. They are abandoning the sinking 60-40 ship and swimming rapidly toward the absolute return potential of trend-following strategies. But managed futures are not the only place the smart money is aggressively hiding. We are also seeing a massive historic rotation into hard, tangible assets. They are buying real, physical things that mathematically hold their value when paper. Fiat money becomes completely worthless. Let us talk deeply about gold. Gold is currently flashing incredibly strong bullish signals across institutional trading desks. Why is this happening? Because gold has an undefeated 5,000-year track record as the ultimate insurance policy against government incompetence and central bank printing. Gold was first used as standardized money by the Lydian kings in 600 before Christ. It survived the dramatic fall of the Roman Empire. It survived the devastating Weimar Republic hyperinflation in Germany. It survived 2 catastrophic world wars. For most of modern history, paper money was just a convenient claim check for real physical gold. Up until 1971, the United States dollar was strictly backed by physical gold sitting in vaults. You could literally walk into a bank, hand them paper dollars, and demand physical gold coins in return. But then President Richard Nixon completely severed that foundational tie. He temporarily took the world off the gold standard, and that temporary measure became permanent. Since that exact day, paper currencies around the world have lost massive, horrifying amounts of their purchasing power, because governments and central banks can just print endless trillions of dollars out of thin air to fund their deficits. But you cannot print a single ounce of gold. It has to be violently ripped out of the ground using heavy diesel machinery, explosives, and massive amounts of human labor and energy. It is bound by the strict laws of physics and thermodynamics. When elite investors see crude oil hitting $100, and they realize that cost-push inflation is permanently destroying their stored savings, they instinctively run back to the ultimate ancient safe haven. Gold is the global decentralized ledger of human distrust. When institutional trust in central banks falls, the price of gold naturally rises. We are also seeing a massive structural surge in the energy sector itself. Even as the broader technology and financial stock markets bleed, dry global energy companies are literally printing free cash. They are heavily taking advantage of the high oil prices, not to drill thousands of new expensive wells, but to ruthlessly repair their corporate balance sheets. They are paying out massive special dividends to their shareholders, and they are aggressively buying back their own stock to increase their share prices. They are among the very few companies on Earth that actually financially benefit from the invisible inflation tax that is absolutely crushing everyone else. So what is the actual strategic playbook for the everyday investor trying to navigate this historic chaos? How do you survive and protect your family when the traditional rules of finance are completely broken? The elite institutional strategy quietly circulating right now suggests completely abandoning the outdated 60-40 model and moving immediately to a highly defensive 55-35-10 asset allocation model. This is a dramatic structural shift, designed specifically for macroeconomic uncertainty and persistent stagflation. Let us break down exactly what this means. The 55% represents your equity exposure, but it absolutely does not mean buying risky future-promised technology stocks. This massive portion must be heavily weighted toward cash flow, positive, robust businesses. You need companies that produce real physical goods and vital services that human beings are literally forced to buy, regardless of how bad the economy gets. Think about consumer staples, healthcare, utilities, and energy producers. These companies possess a superpower called pricing power. If their underlying manufacturing costs go up, they do not suffer. They simply raise the price of their toothpaste, their life-saving medicine, or their electricity, and you still have to buy it. They pass the inflation tax directly onto the consumer, protecting their profit margins and your investment. The 35% bucket represents your new safe haven allocation. But remember, safety no longer means buying long-term government bonds. Those are getting completely destroyed by the inflation monster. Safety in this new regime means holding short duration, fixed income that is not mathematically sensitive to central bank interest rate hikes. It means holding incredibly high quality corporate debt that pays a premium yield. Crucially, it means making significant allocations to those alternative managed futures strategies we discussed earlier that can actually generate massive profits when traditional markets enter freefall. And it absolutely means holding physical gold as a pure, unadulterated inflation hedge. Finally, the 10% bucket represents pure unallocated cash. In a normal, stable economic environment, financial advisors will tell you that holding cash is a guaranteed massive loss because inflation slowly eats away at its hidden value. But in a highly volatile, violently crashing market, cash is not just a piece of paper. Cash is an incredibly powerful call option on every single distressed asset in the entire world, with absolutely no expiration date. When markets crash and incredible, world-class businesses go on sale for massive discounts. Cash gives you the tactical ammunition to buy blood in the streets. Furthermore, it gives you incredible emotional psychological stability. If you hold a strong cash position, you do not panic sell when the stock market drops 5% in a single afternoon. You view it calmly as a magnificent buying opportunity. The overarching critical theme of this entirely new financial era is that you can no longer afford to be lazy. You cannot just blindly put your money in a broad passive index fund close your eyes and go to sleep for 10 years, expecting to be wealthy when you wake up. The fundamental macroeconomic gravity of the planet has drastically shifted. We are rapidly entering a dark regime of higher structural inflation, driven by massive geopolitical deglobalization, severe underinvestment in critical global energy infrastructure, and completely unsustainable mountains of sovereign government debt. The 60-40 teeter-totter is permanently broken. To survive and truly thrive in the coming decade, you must aggressively adapt. You must look far beyond simple stocks and bonds. You must deeply understand how physical commodities actually drive the global economic engine. You must respect the incredible mathematical power of trend following. We couldn't fit all the deep dive details and practical strategies into this video.